I like that announcement. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, PitNug members. This is our very first Lunch and Learn. The topic is SuiteAnalytics, and our presenter is Brian Bishop, who is the president of the PitNug Group. He's also from Pyrotechnico, and he's going to share his knowledge today. So, Brian, go ahead. I pass it over to you, and I'm going to go on to mute. And I appreciate if everyone else would be on mute, unless you have a question. So, go ahead.
Okay. So you guys see my my NetSuite window?
I do.
Okay, well that's positive. That should mean everyone does. So I'm going to talk today about SuiteAnalytics, how to set up the analytics, how to use them a little bit, what they're used for, and I'll start out by just doing a quick little show and tell of SuiteAnalytics. So when you look at it, there's reports, there's saved searches, and now there's SuiteAnalytics. And I think originally NetSuite wanted to look at really potentially combining the best ofs of saved searches and the reports and moving it all into one kind of data, pivot table, chart graphical kind of interface. And I think they've somewhat succeeded in that. Of course, I think right now we're kind of stuck with all three, and you have to decide what you use and when. So, you know, I do a mix, and you'll probably see that with what I showed today. I do a mix of that. So a great example is right here. This is a kind of a sales funnel view, and it shows stages of our sales orders. And when you go into the workbook itself, I'm going to show you some examples today of how to set this up. But basically, you get to the point within analytics where and as it loads, this is always the pros and cons of doing live demos, as Bill Gates and Steve Jobs have taught us over the years. Sometimes they go better than others, depending on connectivity and whatnot. So each workbook starts out with a data set, and it takes a second to load it in there. You can then, from that data set, make pivot tables, charts, and I'll ignore the loading for a second. I'll get to a couple more live examples in a minute. But you'll get to the pivot tables, the charts from those, and you could relatively do unlimited pivot tables and charts off this. So you make a data set, and you then can make pivot 1, pivot 2, pivot 3, chart 1, chart 2, chart 3. And this is an example that we did some years back. So this is just a pivot table off the data that shows us our funnel and our number of shows by year as of a few years ago. We could also turn that into a chart format. We broke off different parts of it. And I'll probably jump back to this later, but why I picked this example is when you look at the workbook, and I'm going to go over kind of each one of these pieces in a minute. This is just a high level overview. When you jump from the workbook into the data set itself, you'll be able to see some of the complexities of this. And let's see here. Okay, and I'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to use this kind of when I wrap up to show an example of this is where we really built this with nested logic in here to get to some of these views. So this one took some hours, I won't lie, to figure out the nested logic, but once we got it to work, it worked. So, okay, and then this is kind of what I was talking about right here. So we basically got into where we took the data, we connected a bunch of different things, but then actually got to the point of doing a nested and statement within the ORs to get to what we really wanted. So we sectioned off the data to say, you know, we want to look at certain of our sales orders. We wanted to look at, you know, transaction is the main line, a show date, and then we started nesting some OR logic. And then the final OR, we nested 2 AND statements to section off whether it was before or after 2019 with different logic to pull the sales orders in as we change some of our processes and our transactions. So this really does let you get to the point of building the complex nested logic to get to the results. But again, it takes a little practice and a little time with the data sets to get there. So what I'll do is I'm going to jump over to our trucking company to give some examples here and to kind of go through the analytics set itself. So this is one example right here is we do kind of a revenue by driver by week pivot from analytics, and we have it right on our dashboard in a view, just like we did the charts and everything. So it lets you put up on the native dashboard, I think up to 5 different views, whether they're pivots or charts from your analytics, from any analytics workbook or collection of workbooks that you have. I've made custom tabs up top, and actually you could stick in a ton of them as much as your system can load. Obviously you saw some of the data sets have slower or faster load times than others in here. But you can put as many as you want on a page from analytics. If you make a custom tab, like I made a custom tab called trucking, and I could just fill it with analytics outputs or save search outputs or portlet outputs or whatever I want to do. Okay, and then I mentioned I wanted to go over real quick before I jump in, thoughts on where to use searches versus reports versus analytics. Again, it's a little more up to you and what you're comfortable with. You know, I think the analytics is the tool that I've said before in these meetings are kind of the wave of the future. And I think that from that perspective, I think you want to look at the analytics tools and where you could replace your saved searches or where you could augment your saved searches with tools in the analytics and get the dashboard views, because they're going to put the most amount of time from NetSuite's perspective in upcoming years into analytics. And in general, they've made, you know, enhancements with the formulas, enhancements with what data sets you can connect to. So I've even found there's been a few cases where I've been able to solve something with an analytic, with a data connection, kind of a sub-record relationship that I wasn't able to actually do in a search or a report. So I'm starting to see some cases now where we actually solve some problems with analytics and analytics only. So again, it's kind of like a tool in your toolbox. I would say it's necessary as a NetSuite admin to know it, but also there's some places where it's the only tool for the job compared to saved searches and reports. But you know, if you look up here, I've got plenty of portlets fed by saved searches as well, where I put in some complex logic. I'm using some of their native metrics fields, and then I've also got analytics wrapped in. So I'm kind of using different tools for the job depending on which one I think will do it the best. So I'll jump to the interface. Obviously, I assume you guys all know as admins, or if you're here, that analytics is simply under the analytics tab up top. You click it, you go in, and you've got, and they've been changing this interface every quarter, but you've got workbooks and data sets. Obviously, you can also tag my favorite workbooks up top, which I've not actually really found that much of a use for. But if you want a quick view, if there's some that you always use in your analytics suite, because obviously I'm getting a lot now starting to build up in here. You can obviously tag them as a favorite workbook, which would be as simple as me going like this and saying mark as a favorite. I guess it would appear up top. So anyway, now I've actually done that. But anyway, so again, data sets is where you want to start. The data set feeds the workbook. The workbook is where you could further manipulate the data and make the pivots and the charts. So I'm going to jump in and show you guys that, but I guess I'll take my first pause because I'm kind of through my first couple agenda items I wanted to talk through. What questions do you guys have so far based on what I've shown, if any? Okay, so moving right along. I'm going to jump in here to my workbook. What am I doing? Sorry, I'm going to jump into my data set first. So this is a completed data set that's pulling something fairly simple. It's pulling from our sales order and purchase order, but for this conversation, it's sales order is the only thing coming in. It's pulling in transactions. It's pulling in our main line as faults. It's pulling in our subsidiary as our trucking subsidiary, pulling in sales orders and pulling in specific transaction lines. So like FRTO 3010. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back and I'm going to build this out from scratch for you guys. So if I were in here, I would first start with data sets. These are all the data sets I have. I would click new data set. I could copy an old one, but I'll have the fun of building one out for you today. click on transaction. And so you can see I kind of get back to a raw view where down the left-hand side is the transaction data, if you will, and then all the different connected data from that transaction. I'm going to give NetSuite a couple of pros and cons. It also kind of kickstarts you with certain fields here for these transactions. I'm going to give NetSuite a couple of pros and cons. This looks confusing as you get into it, and you can see there's a lot of repetitive type information. So there's the customer that created the transaction, or the employee that created it, or the partner, or the vendor, et cetera. So what that means is if you were to come up here and search for a field like name, you get a lot of name fields. You also get obviously first name, last name, all that stuff, but you also get the name field because, as you know, the NetSuite name exists in basically every kind of record, every kind of transaction. It's got a name field, and that name field is different things. Sometimes it's the customer's name, or the entity's name, or the vendor's name, or the person's name. So that's one place where you kind of have to know what you're looking for. But from the get-go, transaction is highlighted in blue. The fields that are over here already are in blue, and it's giving you some of the common ones like the date of the transaction, etc. So I'm going to, let's say, take type. I'm going to drag it up here and drop it in criteria. And I'm going to choose sales order. And I say apply. So now I'm only going to be looking at sales order lines. Next up, I'm gonna, as I said, I'm gonna get subsidiary. So again, I could go fishing for it, but it's easier, subsidiary, if I could spell, it's easier for me to just grab it right from here. So, and subsidiary is a transaction line field in this case. And again, I'm gonna, it's a lot less than name, but as you can see, subsidiary pops up along a lot of entities here. So you could see that there's a subsidiary of the sales rep. There's a subsidiary of the picker. There's a subsidiary of the entity, the employee that's actually doing the transaction. So this is where you have to get good at understanding the data set, just like for those of you that are into saved searches, or those of you who are into suite scripting, or those of you who are into reports. You kind of have to know how to work with the naming. So again, in this case, I'm going to take the transaction line subsidiary, and it is expedited, and that is our trucking company. I'm going to choose it. With a little luck, my data doesn't disappear. And if it does, I picked the wrong one. And so, and that's why I didn't want to build a completely complicated one to show this as I talk through it. Some of it takes a little practice, and it's looking at the data and figuring out if it's what you want on there. So again, you can see I've got some repeats here and everything, and I'm going to have to hit up the main line is true or false. I'm going to say the main line is true, say apply. And now I'm starting to get it down to where, as you can see, if I, you could resort your data set as you go through it and everything. I could say sort ascending, and it probably is sort descending. You're going to start to get down to the point where, okay, there it goes. Now it's logically ascending. You now get down to the point where you start to see that I have sales order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now because I used, again, mainline is true. I set the subsidiary, I set the type of sales order, and I basically have one line for every sales order in there, and I have a dollar amount. I could then go, mainline is false, and I could be down getting now all of the transaction lines, like all your lines on a sales order. And let's see, this is where if I click here, and I could come into a particular sales order, you start to get to the point then of this is the exact transaction that I'm pulling. So now I think it's best sometimes when you're building these to, if you're looking at sales orders or purchase orders, call one up, see what you're actually getting right here. So like in this case, I'd like to take a look at the mileage that we traveled for each trucking, we're running semis for each trip that we take with a semi for the trucking division. So in this case, on the sales order, it was like a one-day trip. It was $800. It was 648 miles, something to that effect. And if I come back here now, I can start to work down to that. So I know in this case that my quantity, my items, et cetera, I know it's at an 003, so let's keep it easy and just say my item. My item on the transaction line is going to be FRT-O. Let's see here. Can I find it? Can I find you? And maybe I didn't even pick the right one. Let me see. Give me 1 sec. And I'll go test. So while I fish back for 1 second here, any questions so far on what I'm doing? I know this is, I realize as I explain this, this is a lot because it kind of assumes an inherent understanding of the data sets below. But if you're working with safe searches reports, it's relatively the same data set. It's a slightly different way of going after it. So I'm going to pause for 1 second to see how everybody's doing on this while I look for one quick thing here.
Brian, while you look for that, this is Mara. I do have a question on when you went into the data sets, it seemed very similar, and I don't want to assume because we know what that does, but you typed in transactions. So when you're building a data set, is it similar to when you were building a safe search that you could look at, you know, a customer search or kind of use those same high level categories to build a data set? Are they similar, have you found?
Yes. So I had a couple other toys to show you guys. Transaction line item is any of FRT. What am I doing wrong? Let me just copy that. And as I said, these do take a little bit of back and forth, right? This is basically what I'm building here, but transaction line main, transaction line sub, transaction line. Yeah, so I guess there's a couple of things I wanted to point you guys to, and maybe now is a good time to do it. One is, and this is a search in Google, but I'll also throw it in. I'll respond to Ron and Angela with this. There is a 142-page guide called SuiteAnalytics Workbook out there. And this starts to get into all of the different ways to go after this, build the data sets, et cetera, and going through that. There's also, have you guys ever looked at this before? The 2021, and they come out 21.1, they come out with one of these every time they do a release of NetSuite, the actual schema browser. And there is a records browser, a connect browser, and an analytics browser in there that actually gets you to the point of what all these things are named and how to identify them. So generally speaking, they are similar. If I take a look at the data set for this, you know, a transaction is a transaction just like in a search. And if you come back to, I'll come back here like I'm building a new one again. If I say new data set, you'll have all of your normal stuff here, like your item, your partner, your projects, transactions, any add-ons you did, like we use RS Smart, has all their tables in there. All the same ones, work calendar, vendor that you'd be looking for when you would put together safe searches. And then even any custom records that you have, like the, no, I did a 5Y root cause custom record. I do a bunch of custom records throughout here, but they're all, as soon as you make the custom record, it propagates over in here, so you can use it. Therefore, like let's say we attach a 5Y root cause investigation on a transaction, let's say if a show that we were doing or something needed a 5Y root cause, and then it'll all be connected because on our 5Y transaction, we choose the transaction it's tied to, it's all connected in this record schema. And it is the same names that you're dealing with when you go into a safe search, for example. Now, the other caveat, and then you have to tell me if I actually answered your question, but the other caveat is that when you're working with formulas, you're working with the field names. So like, let's see, what's a good one that we mucked around with here? Last delivery. Oh, I'm not in my admin role. So you know when you're in your admin role, you can click on one of these and it'll give you the actual field name down here in the lower corner. It's when you're in a formula, you're dealing with that field name. When you're in the analytics browser, you should see the actual name you're giving it on the screen, and it should default to the form that you have checked as the preferred form. So if you call it booking date on your preferred form, and on another form, like sales order form preferred, sales order form other, on sales order from other, you called it booking date 2, you should still see the booking date that is what comes through in your actual, in the actual analytics schema browser, or the analytics browser. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. That's helpful to know in the analytics, if I'm understanding that right. Like you would see booking date instead of when you right click in your role, you see like customer entity booking date, like kind of where
Right.
you have to dig to find it. Awesome. Okay.
But if you're playing with formulas, you're kind of back to that system name, the
Okay.
ID, whatever. You're back to that, unfortunately. So there's kind of a mix. All right, so let's see here. Let's see, so I'm going to do item. I'm going to just have any luck at this. Okay, I skinned the cat another way on that one. And so we have so many items in ours, instead of coming in and trying to fish through this list and find it, which was probably a 10,000 limit, I went into custom values and stuck in what I was looking for, hit apply, and did it that way. So for what it's worth, let's see. What else do I want in there? I want quantity in there.
I think it's good when you can't find or can't do something and you find another way. We're learning that way too, so that's good.
Yep. And honestly, this is where you start to get into it as well. So I think what I realized was, I learned this one before, that when I was digging the transaction line quantity, I was getting negative numbers for my miles. And so I actually took the absolute value of it. Now, you're going to look at me and think that's kind of crazy. But again, to that point of skinning the cat another way, when you're digging through debits and credits and all that, there's going to be positive and negative sometimes. And for whatever reason, however that one is pulling through analytics, I realized at some level, instead of having my 648 positive miles, when I'm pulling it through in the data set, let's see where I went off to, I had a negative 648 in there for the miles. And I think I remember, as I made the first one, this was about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, I made it. I ended up just, as I said, taking the absolute value, as I recall, in that. But that said, and that's where you would end up doing that in a formula field. So let's see here. I'm just going to leave it at that for 1 second here. Okay. So as I said, let's say you wanted to do something like what I just said. This is the formula field part that I wanted to show you guys. You would hit formula and you would type in the formula that you want. And it's very similar to the formulas that you're typing in Safe Search. So let's see here. So I would search through again, and I would find quantity, transaction line quantity. So, and then I would say that is an integer. And so what this allows me to do is, it says validate. So if I hit validate, it would say output type of the formula set to integer, but the actual return type is the float. Change the formula expression, etc. So I could change this to a float, hit validate again. And as you can see real quick, it came up with a check mark. the formula definition is correct. So there is a formula checker in analytics, which I kind of like, before you just, spit it out in a saved search and it kind of ruins your saved search and doesn't save it sometimes, depending on how bad you screw up, or it just comes out as invalid expression. This has a little formula checker in it, which is pretty cool to get you through it. So again, let's say I'm trying to define that as an integer, like before, I'll say validate, and it gives me an error. It won't let me save it or whatever. It says the output type of the formula is set to float. I would change it to a float and say validate. So let's say I did that, and when I type in a field name, I would call it, Brian, Quantity, Brian Quantity, and I'd say save. Now, I have the transaction fields, and now I have a formula field here called Brian Quantity. I would throw the formula field down here, and with a little bit of luck, it is going to come in at same thing, -648, -648. So what I would do to that is then I would come into formulas here, and I would edit it. And I can either come down and find my favorite, the old absolute value, or I can multiply it by -1 if I want to be if I want to cheat and do it that way. So let's say I would take the absolute value of that one, say validate, it likes my formula, hit save, come in, it's going to refresh. And just like magic, the absolute value of that negative quantity turns into positive quantity, and I have my mileage in there. So it's kind of silly, because why would the quantity be negative? Again, sometimes you as you stumble through this, you're going to find some things like that, and maybe there's some things that they have to fix in upcoming releases. Maybe there's a valid reason I'm not even thinking about for that. But again, it kind of handily gave me a way to show you guys how to use a formula in here as well. And you could stack up as many formulas as you want. Let's see, I also, what's one of my other ones I like to use? I like to use, I'll take the date and I'll turn it into a week or a quarter or a month or a year. And really quick, I will show you how to do that too. So you can get a second example of a formula. Maybe I'll take a break after that and ask for questions. Let's say then I'm going to, what's kind of funny is I'm now using my favorite one to keep going back to the other one. So I finally found a handy use for my favorites up there. So what did I do here under the data set? Open data set, formulas. Okay, delivery week. Oh yeah. I'm just going to steal this so you don't have to watch me stumble through remembering how to make a week formula in Oracle. So, and I'll get to why I said in Oracle in a second. So let's see here. So I go to analytics, I go PNUG, I go back into my data set, and I go to formulas. So what I want to do is I want to take that date there, and actually I will say I have a delivery date is different than the transaction date. So I know that I have a delivery date on the transaction line for every order. So I am simply going to go like this and get the actual delivery date for our trucking loads. And that's obviously you could do the week off either one of them. You could do it off multiple things if you want. But I'll do that. So even though the order was put in here, it was delivered here. So the order was put in on here for 6/21, delivered there. I'll go new formula. And in this case, I want to, let's see here. You steal that. It's actually what it is, but I'll go like this for you so I can find it. So again, just like I did on the other screen, I would type in delivery date. I would find my transaction line delivery date. I would pop it up there. And this gets back to my point. This is the transaction lines dot customer column pyro delivery date. So that's actually the field name I gave it. And it kind of does the transaction lines dot custom. So that's where you get back to kind of that looking at it to know the field name, to know what you're going after for the formula. That said, I would do to-care, transaction lines, cust column, pyro delivery date, boom. Now this is going to give me an error, and I'm going to call this, by the way, delivery week. Does anybody know what error it's going to give me?
It's not an integer.
It's not an integer. So in this case, I'm using toChar. That's going to be text. I'm going to change that to string. I'm going to validate it, and it's going to magically work. Secondly, has anybody ever played with these? If you know the significance of the Oracle YYYYIW versus the YYYYWW. When you get into making things weekly, what I learned was the IW gives you a Saturday to Sunday week. The WW does some really weird 7 days from wherever the year starts. Meaning if the year starts on a Wednesday, I was running into like every week was starting on a Wednesday, and I was kind of like, why would anybody use this? So this gets back to the ISO work week. But if you ever get into playing with weeks, that took me some searching in Google before I figured out what was going on. So if you remember that conversation, it'll save you some time. But that said, what I'm going to do with this formula is it takes this and turns it into a delivery week. So that was a whole bunch of work to prepare the data set the way I wanted to, because if you're thinking ahead a little bit, I want to like make a bar graph by week, by whatever, by customer or by total miles or whatever. I think I have dollars, I have miles in here. So I can use this data set to do multiple things, dollars by week, miles per week, etc. Once we set this part up, now it starts to get pretty easy to go over and make those pivots and make those charts. So the real work is getting the data set and the logic the way you want it and the formulas the way you wanted it. Because again, right here, I fixed with formulas, I had a negative quantity, I had a delivery date and time, but I didn't have an actual delivery week. So I converted that to the ISO weeks. And now I have a data set that's repeatable in here that I can actually go and create a workbook from. So that was, let's see, setting up a data set, related records, formulas, live examples. Okay, the other thing, before I ask questions or for questions up, I'll touch on, this is a mile deep of things that, that it's connected to. You could actually get down here at the bottom to the transaction audit trail, and I've done that in some things. You could really get to anything that you have related, like sales order, the related sales rep, all the information about the sales rep. So just like when you have those ... kind of items at the bottom of the saved search and those related records, I've realized this actually takes you slightly farther. And sometimes, but not all times, it solves that double jump problem of where you have a, you want a related record of a related record, you can't get to it. It hasn't gone to the point where you could do query on a query on a query, which is something NetSuite promised or hoped for in the early going, and they said that you'd be able to do that. It hasn't gotten fully to the level where I can't take this data set and then connect it to something else completely, like another data set I made. And that's where you'd still have to get into scripting and all that. But beyond that, this has gone deeper, I will throw out there, than saved searches have gone. And I explicitly solved the problem a couple weeks ago on something where, again, I couldn't do it with a saved search. I was able to do it by going to the multi-level join conversation in here. So it offers you more. And again, you'll have to get good at clicking around in here. But like, let's say one more time, we went into the transaction, we pulled certain fields in, right? And if I want to pull in anything else from here, let's see, what else am I? Oh, if I want to pull the sales rep of the transaction, I would, sales rep, I would throw that over here. And again, I would come back up to transaction, click on it. And now, again, your sales rep is in blue because it's over here. And that's how to keep track of that. If I wanted to lose a field, I could just say, remove it, takes it out of the top there. So it does kind of remind you what's in blue of what you have. Same thing, transaction line, it knows that I'm having delivery date and quantity from there. Formulas, these are my formulas, they're in blue. I have them dragged down here. So you kind of keep up top what things you have over here, and you can continue to go and add. So if I come down here, I guess sales rep was empty, so that was a bad example. But anyway, whatever you have, you can then dig, like if I had sales reps and I wanted to get the department of the sales rep, which is probably sales, I'd just be able to come down here to the department transaction and I'd be able to drag it in. But as you can tell, you start to get pretty deep here. And this is what I mean by it gets a lot deeper. That's like 4 levels deep. It actually gets down underneath to an account of 1099. And honestly, I can't even tell you where I made it to. I went 4 levels deep into the sales rep for whatever reason. It let you go that deep down to a 1099 miscategory of the account tied to a department field, and it's actually, there's my answer that I didn't know off the top of my head. It's actually an RF Smart thing attached to the RF Smart install that probably does nothing. So there's a lot of roads in here, I guess, that you could go down where you could say it's useless data to what you want. So you kind of have to know what you're looking for. Like in this case, I know I want to go after the sales order transactions for this subsidiary. I know that I want to go after the transaction line delivery dates because I know on my sales order, I have transaction lines, I have miles are tied to this item. And I know that, you know, on that transaction line, I know my delivery date is right here. So that was the field that I went after by what I did. I went through sales order, went down to the bottom, went down to the mileage lines, pulled off the delivery date and the number of miles.
Hey,
And the
Brian.
quantity negative. Yep. So that's kind of a quick overview of everything we just did to get to this point.
We have a chat from Sherry.
Okay.
USA. She says, so your formula can be more complicated than what reports give you as an option or as option.
I would contend yes, but I'm not a regular user of reports. I kind of went right to save searches for exactly that problem. I had a better understanding of the data and a better way to put in formulas in there. So I didn't do a lot with reports, but I would venture and say yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I mean, you could build large case statements in here as well. I built some scary case statements even within save searches, honestly, and you can do the same thing in here. I do like their validator checker thing. I think that too even gets better than save searches. Okay, so all that, and we have a data set. Does anybody have any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to move on how to turn this into a workbook.
Hey, Brian, I do have one question about items.
Yep.
So when I drag over a transaction line item, it's actually drilling down into the assembly and giving me every component of the assembly and not just the top level SKU. Do you get the same issue?
In here, I wouldn't, and my other side of the business, I may. So item.
Yep.
And you are pulling the transaction line item,
Yep.
correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to think of why that would be.
I've never seen it do this before. I mean, anywhere. You almost have to, it's almost like hard to do what I did. So that's why I think it's something that I did.
I believe what you did, because once in a while you kind of get the wrong thing. So you'd be pulling a transaction line on a sales order where you're expecting the assembly name and you're getting the actual SKUs below it.
I actually get both. So I have type sales order. I have mainline false, and I have the one subsidiary.
You know what you may have to do then if you're getting both. I believe what you're going to have to do. Let's see, transaction. Let's see. Oh yeah, transaction line item. Okay, I don't have the item in there. So if I did item, transaction line item, I believe you may have to do item type.
Oh, okay.
And then you would strain out the assembly that way. As I said, this is what I mean when I say it takes a little bit of work to see what you're getting, and then you got to think through why you're getting it. Then once you solve each of those problems, you build up your memory bank of like things crazy crap I had to do as I built these things, and then you remember going forward. And then someone else will ask you, well, why am I getting this? You're like, I know what to do. And then they think like, oh my God, you're a genius at this. But it's really just, it's what I go back to. It's practice, practice, practice. The more of these you do, the more you're going to learn those nuances. Like I even forgot that I had to do that absolute value thing. And it seems completely crazy that I had to, but once I know that, I realize if it comes to negative, someone else might go, oh, this thing sucks. And you might go, well, you know, it is what it is. You gotta use the absolute value to get the positive. And in your case, you have to pull item and item type. And your answer, your first thing back will be, but my sales order doesn't show the sub items or whatever of the assembly, and it just is how it is. But that's why the item type field is there, so you could solve that. I think it gives you a little bit more, because think about the alternative problem. Someone else is going to go, but I want to see that, but I can't pull it in the same report. That's what I mean by this extends you further than reports and save searches, is you can actually then get that double jump in the case that you just showed.
Yeah.
But then you got to undouble jump it.
Yeah.
That's a negative.
A quick question. How often when you're going through this, do you find that the master data is not correct, and you have to go back to the start and rework the data and then move forward.
Do you mean that your actual master data that people put in at your company's wrong?
Yeah, like how often do you find, like, do you have to have 100% correctness on that?
Well, I mean, garbage in, garbage out. So it depends what's messed up and how bad. I guess what I would do, or the way I've always viewed this is, if you get these kind of charts and reports that I'll show you how to make in a minute in front of everybody, you correct your master data because someone says that's wrong and you say, no, the master data is wrong. Someone has to fix it. And you can really use it to be kind of anal retentive as an admin to get your data correct. So I've always said that even getting the more charts and more pivot tables out for people, the better, because you're going to correct the data more of like the wiki theory of correct data. But it might be a pain up front because if your data is really screwed up, yeah, you're going to see it all, because it's very quick to see it all. Like I know if somebody actually fat fingered in this is 10,000 miles, and I find stuff regularly. In fact, when I did this, I found, oh God, there was a delivery date, and this is a perfect example of what you're talking about. If I sort by delivery date, look at this. Look at this. 5/21/2019. We didn't start the trucking company until 5/19 or whatever, 2020, whatever it was. Therefore, I'm pretty sure this should be 5/19 or 5/21/2021, probably, knowing that sales order. And I was just telling our ops manager for the trucking company he had a transaction screwed up in there, but because I see it in analytics, it sticks out like a sore thumb to me. So it's kind of funny because after this meeting, I'm actually going to write him an email and say, here it is. Do you want me to fix it, or are you going to go fix it? Because you've got one of your sales orders for whatever, a few $1,000 showing in 2019. I assume that's what you mean by master data being messed up.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, yes. So right there's a glaring example of my master data. I have one transaction that's screwed up that I know about from a date perspective in the trucking division. Okay. So anything else before in kind of that's kind of the big, that was a big part of this, because next we go on to basically making the workbooks and deploying them, and then we probably are about out of time.
I do have a real quick question. I know with Save Searches, there's actually an add-in for Google Chrome that will actually, once it's built as a Save Search, you can actually export it as a script, and it will give you the formula to create it, where it's in 1.0 or 2.x. Say somebody else in the company builds one of these data sets, is there the ability to export pretty much the criteria and the columns, almost like a Save Search, that you could then copy over and use in the script?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. And that might be something for the SuiteAnalytics workbook. I've never done that, even on Save Searches. And you say that, and I feel like I've read that before, and it might have helped me when I was doing some of my scripting, but I've never actually done that even in searches. So I've not heard of it, but I never used the other one either, admittedly.
Okay.
That's an interesting thing. And that's a good pickup for anybody on this call, because I think I would probably use what you just said. I'll have to go look for that Chrome plugin, honestly.
Yeah, what I can do is I can actually send it out, because it works in Chrome and also in Brave, which is what some of my users use as well.
Wow.
And it's saved me a few times.
That's sweet. Yeah.
Hey, maybe Mike, send that to me, and then when we email out the recordings available and maybe some other things, then we can have that included. Okay.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Okay. So I'm going to move on in the name of time, and I'll have a little more question Q&A at the end. So let's say I'm going to save it. Again, I know I saved it, but I resorted it. I'm going to hit create new workbook up here. So right now it's just a data set. Now it's going to create a workbook. And I am going to, well, actually, first thing I'll do, so we can do 3 things with the workbook: a table, a pivot, a chart, and you can make as many of these as you want. So let's say I'm going to start out with a table. And again, let's say I'm going to go quantity. I'm going to go date. I'll go delivery week. I'll go quantity, which is like my miles, and I'm going to go transaction. So I can take whatever I wanted to. transaction number, and I can go type sales order. I'll just pick 4 fields. I'll say I could sort ascending. I can come in here and I could rename the field. Like, let's say, rename this one for miles. So instead of Brian quantity, I can call it miles just for the purpose of this report. And I can make myself a nice little report. I'm going to hit save here, and I'm going to call it the, again, test PNUG dataset workbook. And I can type in a whole description here and say who the audience is for, whatever I want to do. Hit the save button. So now I've built my first workbook with a table, and not everything is exportable to Excel, which is, or CSV, which is kind of annoying. They did put this little button on one of the releases, so now I could also click that thing, and voila, I get myself a nice little Excel CSV printout of exactly that table. So that was something that they did do because everybody really griped up a storm after the first release of this when there was no CSV output, as I recall, and a lot of people went nuts and they put it on there pretty quick. So that's a table. I come up here and I could call it, we'll call it PNUG table 1. Okay, so I made a table. I could also go like this, and I can make a second table if I wanted to. And maybe this table I just want, I don't know, date for whatever reason. Boom, same thing, PNUG table 2. So you can start to get the idea of something like this is you could make a whole workbook for your finance team of all the reports that they want to run off a certain data set. Or you can make one off your sales team and have all these different views, all these different reports, some feeding dashboards. And that to me is the thinking, is you make a workbook for a team or a collection of workbooks that they do their job with, as opposed to having to make monstrous Excel workbooks. So you can kind of see that that's the vision of it. We've done a little bit of that, probably not as far as we could have, honestly, but again, I sense that that's their vision. So now, next we're gonna go like this, and we're gonna go, we'll do a pivot next. So pivot wise, let's see here. Let's say I want to go, I'll put in miles as the measure. I'll put in rows as the delivery. Let's see, columns will be delivery week, and the rows will be whatever, the entity. So child level. Does a pretty good job on child level and all that. And then you get this and you have to hit this refresh button sometimes to see the updates. I say sometimes, that time I did. So now you could kind of see, and then you could do delivery week, sort A to Z. So I could kind of look at the, from the beginning when we started the trucking company, we only had a few customers, and you could start to see some of our customers started more and more. But a great look by customer, by delivery week of how many, in this case, how many miles we ran for them. Oh, and obviously I use quantity in this case. So this is a good, I wanted to show you guys this too. So let's say, oh, wait, I picked the wrong quantity. So I'm gonna delete that out. I'll go and drag in my Brian quantity. And again, then I'm gonna go refresh, and now all my numbers should be positive and not the negative quantities. There you go. And then likewise, I could right click and I could rename this. I could call that one again, miles, say, okay. Just so it shows up as miles in here when people look at the workbook. I could say, again, pivot is gonna be, call it customer weekly miles, or customer weekly miles, pivot or whatever. Say however you want your naming conventions to work to keep track of what these things are. And obviously then again, I could say refresh and always hit the save button. Let's try to zoom it. Always hit the save button, and then that'll save it in your data set. So again, let's see, last one I'll show you, a chart. Kind of the same deal. You have your series here of, let's see, what's my series going to be? My series is going to be, my measure will be quantity. My series will be, well, this will go a little crazy, but my series will be the entity. and my x-axis will be delivery week. And then, okay, yeah, I'll get to that in a minute. So let's say, boom, let's put the chart in there. Okay, and that's crazy because now that's like every customer is going to be on there. But anyway, that said, now I could also choose a bar chart, a column chart, an area chart. Unfortunately, this is the only level of charts that they have. They don't have, so we could, make the bars go the other way, for example. They don't have pie graphs, they don't have the geographics, and I assume that eventually they're gonna do that. Obviously, I have way too much data in here. But that said, now let's say I want to take my entity and I only want to do a top 10. Now I could actually get down to my top 10 customers and it makes a little bit more sense. And I can go top 10 by week, however I want to do it. Let's see what else here. I could say sort entity. Okay, filter entity. I wanted to show you this. Filter entity. So now I can actually add a filter to it. So let's say I only want to look at, let's just say I only want to look at, something like that. Certain customers, I think I still have my top 10 entity on there. We'll see how that comes out. So anyway, then you could add a filter in here. There you go. And you can see then your filters sit up here. So if I want to get rid of, I could say entity of 7 values and the top 10. The top 10 is really irrelevant for that, so I could take it out. And again, I could go like this and refresh it. So you could sit and mess around and make these exactly what you want. So it's kind of an example. Oh, and you could see the other thing here. You could see this isn't sorted by week. So if I wanted to come into delivery week, I'll say sort A to Z or Z to A. And again, refresh. The good news is it's always refreshed when it's on your dashboard. Whenever you load your dashboard or refresh it, it'll always refresh it for people. So you don't have to worry about people coming into here to refresh it so their dashboards refresh on the positive side. And again, I'll call it, whatever, PNUG chart 1. So, okay. So a little bit of a crash course, but very quickly, once we put all the work into the data set, the test PNUG data set, we were able to very quickly make a table, table 2, miles, boom. So we have a pivot, we have a chart, we have two data tables. You could see that you could apply filters to it. So like anything back here in the pivot table, you could simply, if you want to only look at 2020, you could come in and filter the delivery week and only do certain dates or only do, so there's a couple ways to do it. You could have a kind of a bigger data set than what you want and strain it down in your workbook, or you could strain it down in the data set and say, just give me 2020 and 2021, or just give me 2021, and then you have a 2021 data set. So it's kind of your call how you design those. Do you want to strain the data and put in that logic in the data set itself, or do you want to do it in the workbook? And so then you could say, I want a 2019 pivot and a 2020 pivot and a 2021 pivot, and you could set it up that way for your users. But you can see it was pretty quick and friendly for me to make, a chart, a pivot table, and a couple of data tables. If you want to ever jump back then, and I'll throw this in here, if you want to jump back, you could always, your data set's right here. If let's say you want to add something else, you could say open data set. And let's say I want to add in, I don't know anything, what would make sense? Let's see. Oh, what if I want, I don't know, what if I want my my driver. So if I want to bring my driver in here, that would be, oh yeah, it's beautiful. That's my, it is actually my, it's actually my driver, the resource allocation ID. Let me see. So then what I would need is my actual resource. So I have my resource. No, okay. So, all All right, so I'm just going to show you how to do that. I'd have to take another minute to figure out. I could actually get to the person's name and bring it in here, which would be more meaningful than just the actual ID number of the driver resource allocation tied to it. And what I'm talking about is when you look at my sales order itself, we actually tie the driver, the number of hours, all that through an actual resource allocation of the driver who's going to be running that load. So, but you can get to that in here. I'm just, in the name of time, I'm not going to sit and try to wind through. But what I wanted to show you was, let's say that's an actual person's name as opposed to resource allocation. But I could say save, and I could say apply to workbook. And now I would come back in here, and now I would have that there. Let's say I wanted to add that to PNUG table 2. Now I would have that in there. And so you got to remember, I want a new field. I've got to go back to the data set, update it in there. Then I can come through and update it in a workbook or a table or whatever I wanted to, and that would all come through. And I think that was, looking at my list here, time the data set pivots charts. Yes, changing the data sets, refreshing the data sets. So that kind of covers now the data sets and making of the workbooks. And now you have a workbook that you can go and share with someone. I'll get to that next on the sharing, the permissions, all that, and then putting it on a dashboard to actually, I think I will work through most everything, but I'll pause real quick. Any questions on the whole workbook conversation, making these fun charts? Angela, Rhonda, good?
Yep, that sounds good to me.
So once you're there, we could share them. And you can either share with roles or people directly. So if I wanted to share this, with a role, I would simply, how would I share it with I'll share it to my role, my other role. I would just go share, boom. And now the workbook is shared out to someone. Click share again, roles. I can see it's already shared to me. I could take myself off, hit it again. So you share out the workbooks to people accordingly. And so then that person can use them. The other thing I will show you real quick now is, now that you have this, let's say I come into a dashboard. Let's see here. Let's do personalize analytics setup. So now the analytics portlet gives me access to everything I just did. And with any luck, I'm going to have PNUG down here. I'm going to have PNUG down here. No. Yeah, I don't have it. Let's see. There it is. Okay. Oh, okay. It was under T for test. Test PNUG data set. And under the test PNUG data set, you could see I have PNUG chart 1, the pivot with miles. So I could really do anything I want to in here. But let's say I do it like this, and I'll call it PNUG test. And now hit save. Now I can, not sure how this will come out. It's a full screen. But now I will have, okay, not too bad. Now I will have a chart, and I could actually hover over and get like the customer names and the quantities and the week on it. I'll have a full view of this. And I can actually change it between a bar, a column, an area chart right on here in the dashboard itself. And I can even show a percentage. So now that'll be there every time, and it'll always update whenever it comes in. Showing the percentage is worthless on that one. But that's basically how you do that. If I wanted to come in and put the pivot table in here, same thing. I'd come to analytics. I would go, I'd go setup. And I would come into PNUG. And I would come into, what did I say, pivot. And you could set the number of visible rows. Let's say I set that to 20, hit save. And that's going to tell you how long it is. And then I could have the full pivot. sitting there, like I say, and then I could, wind over to it or go up and down, but I could have the pivot in there. So again, in here, then I would always have the pivot now on my trucking page, and I would have the chart that we made always showing up on the trucking page. And again, standardly, they give you like 5, I think, on the main dashboard page. When you come in and do the whole setting up of your own custom dashboard pages, you could set up however many you want. You could have 100 analytics things if you want. You just have to sit and wait for them to load. And by the way, when there's like 100 things loading or whatever, it's really, really slow. We've tested that and overdone it a few times. But that is how you actually deploy them to dashboards. So your first step is sharing that with someone, like a role. In this case, I didn't have to share it because I'm the one who made it in my Expedited manager role. I generally like to do everything from my admin menu. I kind of went through the trucking division menu just because I was using them in all the examples. Generally speaking, probably a good rule to always use your admin menu to make them and share them out from there, so you kind of know where they are and who owns them. But I believe me as the owner would be me as the owner everywhere under Brian Bishop, the username. But that's probably a best practice. Don't do what I just did. Make it from your admin menu. And that, let's see, I think the only other thing I will do is from here, you could always go like this, click up here and say, jump to the workbook. So I'd be able to jump right to the workbook. And the last thing I will leave you with is pivot tables are not, and charts I believe are savable as the chart as I recall. Yeah, maybe not. Pivot tables are not exportable. These tables have the little CSV thing. Pivot tables do not. People griped about it. I didn't mention you could add subtotals. You could total rows. You could total columns. You could put it at the top or the bottom. So you could do all the totaling that you want up here. You could freeze certain. Let's see, enable. You could enable row highlighting or disable it. So same thing with column highlighting. You can go like that and be able to highlight things for people, which is kind of cool. You can freeze the row headers. You could freeze the column headers. So you could say like that. So like that crazy, like that. So you can freeze the side. So just make it however you want. The user can make it however they want for presentations. And again, you cannot, I repeat, you cannot export a pivot table. There's always screen scraping, and I'll leave you with that. It's unfortunate people have griped about it. Maybe eventually you could export a pivot table, but I don't know. They'd have to really integrate with like a Google sheet or a Excel sheet, and maybe it's unrealistic. So what we've been doing is where people want to have the pivots in Excel or whatever, we've been downloading the data set for them, remaking the pivot and saying, here you go, have fun in Excel. It is what it is. So that is everything I wanted to share.
We want to open it up to any questions then,
we
right?
better, yeah.
Any questions? Do.
I know there's a lot going on.
Yeah, it was a lot, but it was really good, and it was a lot to cover too.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but thanks, Brian. This was tremendously helpful.
Yeah, we do really appreciate it, and so if anyone else has an idea for a lunch and learn, or some other topic we want to go through as opposed to the 15-minute webinar, just shoot me an email. But I do really appreciate this, Brian, because I know a lot of people were interested, and we did have a huge turnout. So
Well,
go ahead.
practice.
It's practice.
Is the biggest thing. Once you start making a few of these, and you realize like you'll trigger ideas. You'll get to say, oh, you know what, I want to use Safe Search for this, or man, it would be really cool because if I just made these 5 views for my sales team. There's some people that a couple of the views that I flashed over today on my dashboards, people say it's like their Bible. They look at it every day, and that means they don't have to go in and run a Safe Search. They don't have to go and export to Excel and muck around with charts. They can sit there and go to a dashboard. It's all updated. It's graphical. It's visual. And they could see what they need to work on for the day. And those are the kind of things that I think are the low-hanging fruit for people to go after and get the practice with, to say, because even here, you know, we were able to wrestle. Even I ran into a couple problems, honestly, when I was building it, because I didn't remember how I did some of it from like whatever, a year and a half ago when I built this thing originally. But just to get, you know, sales orders by customer, by miles, all that stuff, and get them into a couple views. I mean, it took a little while, but once you make it, it's there, and then it's solved, and you can move on to something else, and people don't have to be, you know, looking at this. So
Yeah. You know, this is recorded too. So for anyone that wants to go back, I will post the video, the recording, probably not till next week, but I will send an email out once it's done. So anybody that has anything else they want to add to that, or let me know before next week. So, okay.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
Brian, this is Mara. As you were talking about like sharing these workbooks and data sets with other individuals in your company, when I share a save search or report, sometimes up top in the browser where it has the link for that, I will send that. Is it the same if you do that with these analytic reports? Like if I wanted to share, yes, like if I wanted to share, if I just copied that and emailed it to a coworker, would they be able to click on that and then access that in NetSuite?
let's see. Looks like the answer could be yes.
Okay.
Oh, we'll give it a second. Yes, the answer is definitely yes. It worked.
Okay.
Yep.
A simple question, but I was thinking of that because sometimes when instead of, you know, downloading it, if they just wanted to go into NetSuite and, you know, look at it here in this view.
Yeah.
Okay.
And usually, like I say, you just need, obviously it's like /report.nl / workbook is 85. That's a good sign.
Okay.
Yep.
Anybody else? Okay, then. Thanks again, Brian. And this meeting is over. We'll see everyone. Have a great evening, afternoon.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.